Some of you may be familiar with the contemporary spiritual writer and teacher whose name is Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle has written 2 best-selling books, The Power of Now and A New Earth, both of which I highly recommend. For much of his life, Eckhart Tolle suffered from depression. One night he found himself in such deep despair that he kept repeating over and over to himself, "I can't live with myself anymore. I can't live with myself anymore." And although it seemed as if he was having a breakdown, Eckhart Tolle was experiencing a breakthrough. He suddenly realized that if I can't live with myself anymore, then there must be 2 me's, the I and the self with which it could no longer live. And since Eckhart Tolle knew that he was only one person and therefore couldn't be 2, he realized that one of those selves must be false. And that insight, that discovery of the false self, freed him. In a time of great darkness in his life, Eckhart Tolle experienced enlightenment, and he wrote this: "What a liberation to realize that the voice in my head is not who I am. Who am I then? I am the one that sees that." The voice in our head, the voice that tells us that we're 2, that we're separate from one another and separate from God, is the voice of the false self. The purpose of the spiritual life is to crucify the false self so that we can resurrect the true self, the Christ self, the divine self. In our words of integration and guidance this morning, which Chris read for us, we heard the word wanting. It's a term that was coined by the medieval Christian mystic Julian of Norwich. In the 14th century, she discovered what Jesus did centuries before her and what Eckhart Tolle would discover centuries after her, that we are not 2, that we are one. But the church silenced her for writing about it. She wrote, "In the sight of God, all humans are one, and one person is all people, and all people are one person." That is the purpose of the spiritual life, to recognize that oneness, to become one with the one with all that is, just as Jesus did, and he said we could do it too. In today's gospel, Jesus says, "I am in the Father, you are in me, and I am in you," meaning we are all one. These words come from Jesus' final discourse to his disciples. Right before his arrest and trial, Jesus is giving his disciples his final words. He knows he's not going to be with them much longer, and he wants to let them know that they will not be orphaned. And he says to them in today's gospel reading, "I'm going to send you an advocate who will be with you and within you, always and in all ways." So who or what is this advocate? Well, the word advocate comes from the Latin root word voco, which means voice. And Jesus calls this voice the Spirit of truth. It is not the voice of the false self that tells you you're 2. It's the still small voice deep within you that reminds you of your oneness. And that's the purpose of religion. As we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, the word religion means to realign, reconnect, reunite, so that the 2 become one. Julian of Norwich and all the Christian mystics understood that all of us could experience oneness with God. That's what mysticism means, union with God. The early Christian mystics were known as the Gnostics. The word Gnostic means knowledge, but it's not intellectual knowledge. It's knowing of the heart, a deep intimacy. The Gnostics believed that the spark of the divine was within each person, and that spark, that light, could be freed by gnosis with it, by knowing of it, by intimacy with it. Now, the Gnostics wrote Gospels, but you won't find them in the Bible. The early church fathers hid those Gospels away, hoping they would never be discovered. But they were discovered in 1945 at an excavation site in Egypt. And the Gnostic Gospels tell a very different story than the church was teaching. The church was teaching that God was up there, far away, so far removed from us. But the Gnostics were letting us know that God was right here with us and within us, just as Jesus said. Religion, therefore, should be a way for us to experience that union for ourselves. But as Father Richard Rohr says, we worshiped Jesus instead of following him on the same path. We made Jesus into a mere religion instead of journey towards union with God. This made us into a religion of belonging and believing instead of a religion of transformation. Christianity for centuries now has been more about worshiping the one guy who achieved union with God rather than teaching us how to experience that union for ourselves. That was Jesus' wish for us. Jesus didn't want us to worship him. Jesus wanted us to follow him, to do as he did. And in his final discourse to his disciples, Jesus shares that wish in the words that are now emblazoned on our UCC crest. He says, "I pray that they may all be one." My friends, as we continue our journey together this Easter season, may we become more fully aware of our oneness with one another and our oneness with God. And may that Spirit of truth transform us and set us free. Hello, everybody. This is Sal Sapienza, and I'm so excited to share with all of you that I've written a brand new book. The book is called Childish Thinking: How the Church Keeps Us Stuck in Sunday School. Now, the title Childish Thinking comes from Christian scripture, where we hear that if we wish to grow in spiritual understanding, then we must let go of childish ways of thinking. And yet so many Christians today, even after years of Bible study and Sunday services, still have a very elementary understanding of their faith. They still understand God as some old man with a long gray beard. They think heaven is a place up in the clouds with pearly gates, that the devil is some red guy with horns and a pitchfork, and that hell is a fiery place below the earth. Those are things that we tell children. None of those descriptions appear anywhere in the Bible. And so in Childish Thinking, I try to dispel many of those misnomers, and I explore topics such as God, Jesus, heaven, hell, sin, prayer, and resurrection from the higher perspectives of ancient Christian mystics and contemporary progressive theologians. After each chapter, there are prayers for quiet contemplation and questions for personal reflection and journal writing. Come learn how you can let go of old ways of thinking and begin to see things with new eyes. Come and learn how you can finally graduate from Sunday school. The book is available now on Amazon, and you can read the entire introduction at childishthinking.faith.